house was eerily quiet when the police arrived. Susan Powell's purse was still on the counter. Her keys were in her bag. Her shoes were by the door, but Susan was gone. No signs of struggle. No forced entry. Just a mother, vanished into the cold Utah night. Days later, her husband took their sons camping in a snowstorm. And from that moment on, nothing made sense again. But the most chilling part? What happened 3 years later, behind a locked door, would burn everything to the ground. This isn't just a missing person case. It's a haunting unraveling of control, silence, and a family destroyed from the inside. Subscribe to True Crimes Now, where we dive deep into the darkest corners of human nature, one chilling story at a time. Hit the bell icon, because the next case might be closer than you think. The house was silent, and the snow kept falling. Heavy, wet flakes blanketed the yard, the roof, the icy driveway. Inside, lights were on, but no one answered the door. Two small boys, ages 4 and 2, hadn't been dropped off at daycare. Their mother hadn't shown up for work. And by the time police stepped into the Powell home that December morning, the scene felt less like a family residence, and more like a mausoleum. The silence was thick. Almost staged. There was no sign of Susan Powell. Only the cold. West Valley City, Utah. December 7th, 2009. At first glance, it looked like just another winter morning in the suburbs, quiet streets, buried cars, the kind of hush that only snow can bring. But inside the Powell home at 6253 Sarah Circle, something was wrong. Deeply wrong. Friends hadn't heard from Susan since the previous evening. Her co-workers were concerned. Her purse, phone, and wallet were all still in the house. Her shoes were near the door. But Susan herself was gone. Her 2 young sons, Charlie and Braden, were nowhere to be found either. The only thing missing was her husband, Josh Powell. But hours later, he appeared. Calm. Detached. With an explanation that made no sense at all. He said he had taken the boys camping. At midnight. In the middle of a blizzard. Susan Marie Powell was 28 years old when she disappeared. Born Susan Cox in Oregon, she was bright, artistic, and deeply devoted to her faith. She'd married Joshua Powell in 2001, after a fast and passionate courtship. Friends said she'd fallen hard, drawn in by Josh's charm, his ambition, his promises of shared dreams. But by 2009, those dreams had curdled. Susan was exhausted. Her marriage was crumbling. Josh controlled the finances, dictated how she dressed, and watched her every move. He refused to go to church. Refused to hold down a job. Refused to let her leave. Still, she stayed. For her children. For the hope that something might change. And then, she was gone. Investigators were suspicious from the start. Josh Powell's story didn't hold up. Who takes 2 toddlers camping in the middle of the night? In a snowstorm? Without telling anyone? And more importantly, why had he returned only after police broke into the house? When officers searched the Powell home, they found more than silence. They found a wet spot on the carpet, recently scrubbed. A fan blowing air onto it. No Susan. They found Susan's phone buried in the back seat of Josh's car, wiped clean. And they found her handwritten will. In it, she stated plainly, "If I die, it may not be an accident." Look at Josh. It was chilling. Like she'd known something was coming. And maybe, she had. Friends and coworkers told detectives that Susan had become increasingly fearful in the months leading up to her disappearance. She kept a secret safety deposit box. She told people she was considering divorce, but was scared of what Josh might do. He'd threatened her before. Not with bruises, but with isolation. Financial ruin. Custody threats. Whispers in the dark about what he could take from her. She'd started recording him. Keeping notes. Telling friends that if anything happened to her, Josh was to blame. She wasn't paranoid. She was preparing. As the investigation deepened, the portrait of Josh Powell grew darker. He was obsessive about control. He recorded arguments with Susan, monitored her mileage, refused to let her have her own bank account. He filed for bankruptcy in 2007, despite a six-figure income, claiming nearly $200,000 in debt. Susan worked 2 jobs to keep the family afloat. Josh spent his time tinkering with spreadsheets, hoarding hard drives, and controlling every inch of their lives. But Josh's dysfunction didn't start with Susan. It started long before that, with his father, Stephen. Susan Powell was a key figure in what would soon become a horrifying family saga. And when police turned their attention to him, what they found was disturbing. Stephen had become infatuated with Susan. He kept journals, hundreds of pages, detailing his fantasies about her. He filmed her secretly, kept her used feminine hygiene products, recorded their conversations. In one video, he sniffed her dirty laundry while moaning her name. He called her his soulmate. Susan had confronted him once, told Josh how uncomfortable it made her. But Josh brushed it off, dismissed it, defended his father. By then, Susan was already deeply entangled in a family built on delusion and secrecy. In the weeks following her disappearance, Josh showed little interest in finding his wife. He refused to take a polygraph. He hired an attorney immediately. He stopped cooperating with police. He moved twice. First to his father's home in Washington, then to another location entirely. He told people Susan had run off with another man. He let his sons believe their mother was dead. And when the police knocked, he hid behind lawyers. But he wasn't just running from justice. He was running out of time. What the public didn't know, what the media would only learn later, was that Susan's disappearance was just the beginning of the nightmare. Over the next 2 years, detectives would uncover videos, journals, internet search histories soaked in violent fantasies and control. Josh's computers revealed disturbing content, including animated pornography involving incest and bestiality. He wasn't just erratic. He was dangerous. And all the while, the question remained: where was Susan? In 2011, nearly 2 years after Susan vanished, police executed a raid on Susan Powell's home. What they discovered shocked even seasoned investigators. Thousands of images of Susan, taken without her knowledge. Footage of other women and girls. In a home filled with rot, clutter, and obsession. Stephen was arrested, convicted on voyeurism and child pornography charges. Josh's world began to crumble. And yet, Susan remained missing. A ghost woven through every lead, every interview, every search. Her parents, Chuck and Judy Cox, never stopped looking. They took in her sons, held prayer vigils, appealed to the public. They believed Josh knew everything. And they were right. But what no one knew, what no one could have imagined, was how far Josh Powell was willing to go to make sure no one ever found out what he had done. Because the truth wasn't just buried. It was about to be burned. When Susan Powell vanished in 2009, she left behind more than an empty house. She left behind questions, secrets, and 2 little boys too young to understand the darkness closing in around them. But as years passed and no body was found, the focus began to shift. From Susan, to Josh. And then, to what he would do next. By early 2012, Josh Powell was a man under siege. Publicly, he still clung to the lie that Susan had run off. But behind closed doors, his life was unraveling. He had lost control of the narrative, of the investigation, of the children. Charlie and Braden were no longer in his custody. A judge had awarded temporary guardianship to Susan's parents, Chuck and Judy Cox. The court cited Josh's refusal to cooperate with the investigation, his erratic behavior, and the disturbing material found on computers seized from his home. Even supervised visits were now under scrutiny. Josh was not just losing custody. He was losing control. February 5, 2012. That morning, a social worker named Elizabeth Griffin Hall arrived at Josh's new rental home in Graham, Washington, with Charlie and Braden in tow. It was supposed to be another routine supervised visit. The boys were excited. They hadn't seen their father in days. As they walked up the driveway, Josh stood waiting. He smiled. And then, in one sudden, precise movement, he pulled the boys inside and slammed the door. Elizabeth froze. She knocked. She shouted. She dialed 911. "I'm on a supervised visitation. A parent just took his kids inside and I think he's going to do something horrible." On the other end of the line, the operator struggled to understand the urgency. "Ma'am, I have to prioritize life-threatening situations." "This is life-threatening," she cried. Moments later, the house exploded. The blast could be heard for blocks. Fire consumed the home within minutes, orange flame leaping into the sky, thick black smoke curling into the cold February air. Inside were Josh, Charlie, and Braden. None of them survived. Emergency crews arrived quickly, but it was too late. The house had been deliberately soaked in gasoline. The explosion had been intentional, calculated, meant to erase everything. The coroner's report revealed what Josh had done before lighting the match. He'd attacked his sons with a hatchet. Then he doused the house in fuel. Then he burned it all. For many, it was unthinkable. Even after years of suspicion and horror, no one had imagined this ending. Not like this. Charlie was just 7 years old. Braden was 5. Their deaths weren't just murders. They were silencing blows. A final act of control by a man who couldn't bear to lose. Susan's parents were shattered. They had fought to protect the boys. They had begged the courts to strip Josh of visitation. But the system failed. And now, the last links to Susan were gone. The investigation didn't stop. In fact, it only deepened. Because the house Josh had exploded wasn't just a crime scene, it was a message. A pyre. The ultimate confession wrapped in smoke and ash. Detectives now believed what they had long suspected, that Josh had murdered Susan back in 2009. That he had hidden her body. That everything he'd done since, moving, evading police, manipulating custody, was about keeping that secret buried. But there was more. Josh's younger brother, Michael Powell, had become a person of interest too. And within a year, he too would be dead. Michael Powell had always stayed in the shadows. Quiet. Obedient. But investigators learned that he had sold a car to a junkyard shortly after Susan disappeared, under suspicious circumstances. Cadaver dogs later indicated human remains had once been present inside. Michael refused to cooperate. He lawyered up. And then, in 2013, he jumped from a parking garage in Minneapolis. Another Powell. Gone. 3 deaths. No trial. No confession. Still, Susan's family never stopped searching. Chuck and Judy Cox launched civil suits, demanded legislative reform, and opened every wound to the public in their effort to protect other children, other families. They didn't just lose a daughter. They lost their grandsons too. They lost a future. To this day, Susan Powell's body has never been found. Some believe she lies in an abandoned mineshaft in Utah's western desert. Others think Josh buried her somewhere near the Simpson Springs campground, the very place he claimed he took his boys that night in 2009. But the truth remains hidden. Swallowed by time. Burned in the fire. What remains is the echo of a woman's life. Susan Powell wasn't just a name in a headline. She was a mother. A wife. A daughter. A woman trying to survive under the crushing weight of manipulation and fear. She documented her abuse. She warned her friends. She made sure that, if she vanished, the world would know where to look. And even though Josh Powell tried to erase her, he failed. Because her story still haunts. Still matters. Still warns. After the flames died, After the sirens fell silent, what remained was not just ash and bone, but questions. Devastation. A legacy shaped by pain. Susan Powell vanished into a snow-covered night. Her children were stolen by the one man who should have protected them. And the answers, whatever they were, died with him in that fire. But Susan's voice did not. In the months that followed the tragedy, America turned its eyes to a system that had failed at every level. The warning signs had been there. Susan's will. Her journals. Her desperate words, "If I die, it may not be an accident." Josh's disturbing behavior. His obsession with control. His refusal to cooperate. And the courts, hesitant, indecisive, unwilling to act boldly in the name of caution. Josh Powell was never charged. Never tried. Never convicted. But he killed her all the same. And the law, in its silence, let him do more than that. For Chuck and Judy Cox, grief became mission. They sued Washington's Department of Social and Health Services, claiming the state had put their grandsons in danger. That Josh Powell's visitation rights should have never been allowed. That warning after warning was ignored. In 2015, a jury agreed. They found the state negligent in the deaths of Charlie and Braden. The Cox family was awarded $98 million, though the amount was later reduced on appeal. But no money could touch the loss. No verdict could bring back what was taken. All it did was confirm what the world already knew. That the danger had been real. And it had been avoidable. As media coverage swelled around the case, more light was shed on the dynamic Susan had lived with for years. The psychological manipulation. The coercive control. The isolation. What Susan endured wasn't always visible. But it was deadly. Her story became a symbol of how domestic abuse can wear a smiling mask. How abusers don't always strike with fists. How silence can be its own kind of violence. In Susan's case, it cost everything. Documentaries, books, and podcasts began to tell her story. Cold, a meticulously researched podcast, uncovered never-before-heard audio, journals, and interviews that painted a chillingly intimate picture of her marriage. Josh had controlled every detail of their lives, down to how much she could spend at the grocery store, what she could wear, even how often she was allowed to see her own friends. Susan, despite the pain, kept going. She stayed for the boys. And in the end, they were taken too. Still, Susan's memory lived on, in ways that mattered. Her case pushed lawmakers to reconsider how family court decisions are made. How supervised visitations are handled. How allegations of abuse, emotional, psychological, financial, are weighed in custody battles. Several U.S. states have since introduced legislation requiring judges to consider the totality of abuse, not just physical harm, when evaluating parental fitness. Susan's voice, once confined to diaries and whispered warnings, was now reshaping systems. Her silence had become a catalyst. In West Valley City, Utah, the police never officially closed Susan's case. Though the house on Sarah's Circle was eventually demolished, and the snow from that winter long melted, detectives never gave up entirely. Every so often, cadaver dogs are sent into abandoned mines. A tip leads to a shallow grave. A rumor whispers in from the Utah desert. But still, no body. No trace. Only absence. What makes Susan's story so haunting isn't just the horror of what happened. It's how familiar her pain became to others. Thousands of women, watching from their own homes, saw themselves in her story. In her quiet suffering. In the subtle, escalating tactics of a partner who didn't bruise her skin, but slowly erased her identity. Her legacy, if anything, is that her story helped others speak. Helped others leave. Helped others see the danger before it became too late. In the end, Josh Powell didn't just commit a murder. He created a void. He left behind no body, no burial, no moment to say goodbye. And in doing so, he tried to take Susan's narrative away from her. To render her invisible. But it didn't work. Because through every court hearing, every candlelight vigil, every mother who recognizes the signs in her own life, Susan is still there. Let us know your theories in the comments. We read every one. And if this case moved you,